Today we have two amazing guests. They join us from Motion Property, and we're going to be discussing all things relating property management. Before I introduce them, or I let them introduce themselves, I'm going to turn to Spanish. Usualmente hacemos los episodios en español, así que abajo hay una CC, un botón donde se puede prender los subtítulos, tanto en español como en inglés, si necesitan subtítulos para entender esta conversación o seguirla de lleno. Así que ahora vamos a arrancar. Thank you, girls, for joining us. I'm going to start, Brooke, with introducing yourself. Who are you? What do you do?
I'm Brooke from Motion Property, and I look after the property management side with clients and leasing their properties out once they've settled on them. We then hand it over to the property management team, but I'm basically the part in the middle.
Awesome, perfect. In Melbourne?
In Melbourne.
Awesome. Nurit, do you want to go?
I am Nurit, and I also am at Motion Property. I am the CEO. I work with the entire team to make sure that we are aligned on our values and what we offer our clients, and be able to deliver good service.
That's awesome. Thank you both for being here. We want to bring knowledge to people who either already have properties under management, or maybe they're not, they're trying to think how to start their investment journey. And usually the expectations from Latin America are quite different to Australia. Like, for instance, I don't know if you knew this, but usually in Latin America, most of the real estate agents are also property managers, so they do everything.
Oh, right.
Yes, yes.
Of course they do.
So, exactly, right? So when you come here, it's like, oh, this is the world of specialization. Like, everyone has, like, they're focused on one thing and they're great at it, right? So that's something very different. So can we kick off with, you just mentioned there's leasing, then there's property management, the different parts, that if you could explain a bit in your team, how would it work?
Yeah, of course. So a property basically comes onto us, and normally it'll be introduced, for instance, from you, and you'll say, this is the client they've purchased here, this is what it is, we're getting them ready for settlement, we need you to help them. So once we get to that point, we obviously speak to the client and onboard them and help them between the introduction and the settlement.
Yeah.
Once the settlement takes place, we'll actively start leasing the property, and that's where we're there actively leasing and trying to secure a tenant in, obviously with minimal vacancy. Once everything's done and they feel confident with what's going on, the tenant's moved in, they're introduced to a property manager.
Cool. And the property manager is someone who then stays on top of it ongoing.
Ongoing. They'll deal with everything that falls after the fact that it's lease.
Awesome. And Nurit, just for everyone's understanding, what are the common leasing terms? Is it 12 months, 6 months? What are you seeing in the market right now?
Look, leasing terms are usually 12 months at a bare minimum, and we do that because it takes renters a while to settle into a property. By the time you pay all the moving costs, it's not really worthwhile for most renters to vacate any earlier.
Yeah.
And the same goes for owners. You know, there are fees associated with every time a tenant vacates the property, you know, vacancy rates, advertising costs, letting fees. So essentially 12-month leases are the pretty standard in Melbourne.
Yeah, and for me, success is having a tenant stay as long as possible.
Of course.
Stay forever.
Of course.
Yeah, correct. And can we now discuss a bit about usually how often a property manager would go in to check how the property is looking?
Yeah, so you've got, you'll do the entry report when we're first leasing the property,
Yes.
which is where we'll go in, take all of our photos and make sure that's ready to go for the tenant to move in. Then you've got your first 3-month inspection. So legally we're allowed to go through at the 3-month mark, and then every 6 months after that.
Okay, so someone gets in, you already have the first report before they go in. You want to check within 3 months, and then every 6 months.
Correct.
Awesome, perfect. And why is it important to have 6 months checkouts? I'm going to talk to Nurit, so we're changing it up a bit.
It's very important that you're checking in on the property. This is usually people's most expensive asset.
Yeah.
And with that comes a lot of responsibility on us. We need to make sure, and it's sometimes not even the renter's fault. There are things like underlying conditions like mold or pipes that may be broken. Tenants don't necessarily look out for those things. They're looking for the day-to-day. So for us, it's really important to make sure that not only is the property being maintained in a good condition, but there are no underlying issues, especially with new properties. There's a lot of defects. There's very normal, it's a new property.
And you have the chance to report
so
it.
we can report it, and that's up to the builders to then come and fix it. So a renter may not be bothered by a crack in the ceiling. We don't get many of those. But for us, we look out for those things because that's really important to be able to look at the building defects and make sure they're rectified while we're still under the builder's warranty.
Yeah, and two things come to mind as we're having this conversation from my own personal experience. The first one is, in my portfolio, I have brand new property and established property both. And what I love about the ones that are brand new is I've made the most and paid someone to go in and check it twice. Once before settlement, get a full report, and then a second time, because you have the option of that post-settlement, so you get the full comprehensive report and you can get things fixed. Because as you said, right, like someone whose expertise is checking for defects, of course, there's some defects that I can let go. Not everything is important, but I do think it's making the most of what you have included in a brand new property. And the other thing that just happened to me with a property that I don't have in Australia, it's actually in New Zealand, but I had a water leak, massive damage, a nightmare, and the insurance requested the last 3 inspections, the reports, and I was very thankful of having everything in order. The property manager did a great job there. And so I gave the reports and they're like, okay, we'll pay whatever they were covering, not much, they're always winning. Yeah, but whatever they were covering for, I was like, great, I'm happy that I have those reports because if I hadn't had it, I would have received 0 money.
Yeah, great point.
And I think with that too, just with a lot of our owners are interstate or overseas. So for them, a lot of them haven't seen the property. So this is something that's showing them throughout the lifetime of the property, whether they come to see it at any point or they don't, what that property looks like from start to finish.
I love that you mentioned interstate or overseas. So was you're managing the property for someone who has never seen it, and I have properties that I've never seen myself, right? So how can you help those clients? Like, how do you make them feel like they've done their due diligence with the whole managing a property from a distance?
I think it's just important to educate them as well. From the very start, when it comes to that point where you're getting an inspector through, it's saying, yep, you've got them through, these are your defects, but also giving them peace of mind because defect inspectors will walk through and put blue tape on absolutely everything. That is their job. They will put it everywhere.
Yes.
But it's sitting and going, you haven't bought a lemon. This is normal. This is their job and this is what they're doing. And sort of coaching them through that part at the start.
Yeah, let's address the important parts.
Let's address if there's a leak. 100%.
Yeah.
Let's do something about that.
Of course.
But sometimes they'll there's a mark on the wall and there's blue tape. Things happen. It's not a big deal. But then I think throughout the process, it's making sure, we send out a lot of educational pieces to our clients to make sure that they know what the Melbourne market's doing. What are the changes in legislation? Because the changes in legislation, it happens and they change more than Melbourne weather changes. So it happens.
Have we seen any changes in the last 6 months?
So they're in place, but there's more. They haven't come into effect yet. So as of about February next year, there's going to be some changes.
Can we discuss what they are, just so people understand what things can happen from one day to the next?
It's more so in the way of notices. So a lot of it is obviously protecting the renter.
Yeah.
And notices in the way of being able to get a renter out is going to be a lot harder. And obviously if they're good renters, we want to keep our good renters.
Yes.
But it is going to be harder to have a tenant removed from the property.
Yeah, essentially, you cannot just, for the sake of it, get rid of someone. You have to give a valid reason, right?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
You've got to give a valid reason. There's got to be evidence to support it. So I think that's going to be one of the major ones, is that they've taken out quite a few of those notices that we did have access to.
Yes.
In the way of rent increases, everything's sort of staying the same there, which is good. Obviously, there's always talks of things, but none of those have been put into effect or that we can see coming in, or hope they don't come in. But yeah.
On that note, it is really important to note, and this is what we find, especially with our overseas landlords, they do not necessarily understand how heavily legislated Australian property is.
Yeah.
In Victoria, we have a lot of legislation. It's becoming, the government, specifically in Victoria, is working very hard to try and eliminate self-management. So those owners who are in Melbourne who have always managed properties themselves, it's becoming harder and harder for them to do that. And that's because what they're trying to do is regulate and make sure that tenants are really well looked after. It is becoming harder and harder to buy property in Australia for your average Australian, and so more and more people are going to be renters and potentially never buy a property. So for the Victorian government, it's very important to be able to ensure that tenants feel like they're in their home, to ensure that they're not just being able to be kicked out. And we have a lot of owners from overseas that will be like, well, if they don't like it, kick them out.
Change the locks.
Well, we can't kick them out. You know, it's not so easy. Obviously, there is a way to get tenants out if they are not paying their rent, if they're not looking after the property. But if your tenant is behaving or making too many complaints for maintenance requests, or it does not want, or is contesting a rental increase, it's not so easy for us to go, well, if you don't like it, see you later. Adios.
Yeah.
So,
and you just brought up a topic that I want to discuss. So I know, because I've spoken at length about these things, but I don't think people understand the amount of homework that you do up front as a due diligence before a renter goes in to ensure that you're putting a high quality tenant who will take care of the property and pay on time. So can we discuss a bit of that process, what you check for?
Yeah, of course. So we were actually having this conversation today. So we will check obviously employment, and rule of thumb for us is rent shouldn't be more than 30% of your income. Obviously with cost of living and everything else, that's rule of thumb. In certain circumstances it's different, but that's normally what we go by. A lot of things that we've found is that people are now putting down private landlords as where they're currently leasing. Now, we do title checks to make sure that the name that they're giving us is the name that is on title for that property.
Wow, I had not heard that before. Okay, so people cannot invent names of private landlords. That's really good.
Yeah, or you're calling their cousin who doesn't own the property. They're just living there, or it's through an agent. So we find out a lot of things that way. And as well, sometimes we find out it is managed through a real estate agent. We get on the phone. Hi, we've got this property. They've put down a private landlord. Do you manage it? Yes, we do. So at that point, we then call them. But that's, look, there's so many different things that people do now. So you just have to make sure that you are doing your due diligence and checking the application front to back, making sure that there's enough pay slips, checking the bank balance statement to see that they've got a buffer there, that if anything was to happen with employment, they've got something to fall back on.
And that the bank statement is legitimate.
That too.
Because Brooke has become an expert at picking up fake bank statements where they basically go in and Photoshop that they have $50,000 in their bank account. So Brooke's become very good at being able to spot fraudulent documents because that happens more than you'd think.
And you also check for defaults in payments or things like that?
So we do check for defaults in payments when it comes to their rental reference.
Yeah.
There is something called the renter database, and you can pay to have a renter checked on the renter database.
Cool.
It is only as good as the people that use it because it relies on property managers to put the information in.
So probably you don't have a lot of information, I'm guessing.
If you're checking everything, making sure the pay slips are correct, speaking to HR employers, bank balance statements, you're checking everything. And also I think too, a lot of the time, like our leasing team will meet tenants and you get a gut feeling.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Meeting people in person, that says a lot already. How they present, if they're on time or whatever. Cool. And what happens, Nurit, if someone doesn't pay on time?
Well, obviously there's an arrears process that you've got to adhere to. Renters have 14 days to pay their rent. Making it even worse is they can pay a week of rent and that'll give them another week. So you don't necessarily get the full month in advance, even though that's what they're obligated to do. So our job is to really manage the arrears management process. So obviously the minute legislation allows us, we will send through a notice of to vacate. We then have to wait for a VCAT hearing, which is the Victorian Consumer, what does it stand for? Victorian Consumer...
Gone blank now that you've said it.
Yeah, I know. Gosh.
That.
But it's like the
Victorian
tenancy
it's like the
tribunal.
yeah, it's
The tribunal, Victorian
Yes.
Civil and Administrative Tribunal.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. It's a mouthful.
Yes.
I have been to it many times, but not recently because we've gotten better at putting in good tenants. But essentially it is. It's about going to VCAT, getting a possession order. It is even then, even if you do all the right things, you've got to make sure your forms are filled in correctly. There's a lot of work involved. And then we would get possession of the property and vacate the tenant. It very rarely gets to that with us anymore. Usually the reason people aren't paying their rent is because they've forgotten or things happen in their life, and it's just about managing their arrears, communicating with our owners, and you know, educating owners again. Of course your rent should be in every month, but sometimes it doesn't come in every month. Even good tenants sometimes don't pay on time. It's really important to have a buffer in your mortgage bank account to make sure that your mortgage is still able to be taken out, your outgoings can still be paid, and you're not relying month to month on that rent.
Yeah. So for me, I've had a situation where I had good tenants in and they had not set up a direct debit. And the moment that I had this conversation, it's like, it has already happened twice and I know they're good renters, like they need a direct debit. And then they set it up and the problem stopped, right?
Of course.
It's as basic as that, but some people, life happens, right? And if you haven't established the system in the right way from the very beginning, it is.
Agreed.
Okay. Awesome. And also from my experience, I have been to tribunal.
Oh God.
So the first investments I did, I want to say there were lower quality areas and therefore attract lower quality tenants. And I always, when I share my story, is that usually happens when you're trying to go for a more cash flowing strategy and you're going to areas where people come and go and there's not that much stability and like a lot of, so this is like countryside type of vibe, just to get a sense.
Okay, we've set the mood.
Yeah, and at one point I was like, okay, I cannot keep buying these types of properties. For one of my properties, I was receiving 4 people paying for rent at the same time because they were owing me. And that meant that at one point, luckily enough, everyone was paying what they owed, right? Especially in this place, there were a lot of people that were receiving help from government. So if they don't pay what they owe, they stop receiving the help from the government. The counter side to this was I was dealing with having to do a lot of fixing up because they weren't taking good care of my things and even like left everything there and just the cleanup was not even covered by the bond, right? But one of the very common questions that I received, not from Latin Americans, but from people from Spain. In Spain, they have a massive issue where you get people like going into a property and now they can stay there and no one can vacate them. And they're like, what happens here? And I'm like, no, the laws in Australia work.
Yeah, they do their thing.
Let's establish this. So you will be able to vacate and you will most likely get your money back. And even in my very low quality properties, which I decided to walk away from that strategy and start buying better quality assets to avoid this, right? So all of my properties in the bigger cities, great. The problems arise in the more countryside tier 3 cities, let's call them.
Sure. I'm sure though capital growth in those areas would be much higher.
Yeah, as in...
So you've got to have that balance, right? Are you after the capital growth and you know you're taking a risk with renters and cash flow or something a bit more secure?
You're bringing a great point. So I understand when now clients come to me and they're like, I want my property to pay itself off because that's how I used to think when I started my own journey 6-7 years ago. I was very worried about cash flow. But then I realized that capital growth was really important if I wanted to keep building my portfolio. And also with the bigger cities that bring the bigger capital growth, I was attracting better quality tenants, right? So I was like, okay, I started walking away from my cash flow strategy. I still kept those properties and deal with more problems. Also, there are older houses, so maintenance by itself is higher, right? Like you have to fix things after a certain number of years. But yeah, like it's important to know that the laws work, which is doesn't happen in every country, right? So when you're an overseas,
definitely they work. They are skewed towards and favour towards renters, but they 100% work. And you know, and on top of that, there are lots of things you can do to protect your property beyond making sure you've got the right tenant in place. Which, you know, on paper a renter can be amazing. We have had amazing renters who've come and applied. They may be lawyers, doctors, great income, and even they sometimes things go wrong.
Yeah.
But you know, our job is to protect the landlord as best we can, with not just making sure that we're regularly checking in on the property, keeping communication open with the renter, and making sure that we're really looking after the renter and building a very good relationship with them. But obviously landlord insurance comes into that as well.
Agreed.
So, you know, you get an order from VCAT to say that the renter is X $1,000 amount in arrears or has damaged your property. That's where your landlord insurance kicks in and should be able to then cover any shortfall beyond the bond, which at the moment is sitting at a month for most properties, right?
Yeah.
A month.
That's a good point. So when we talk about insurances, you have the building insurance and then you can have landlord insurance.
Correct.
And to all wealthy clients, we highly recommend they get landlord insurance, just because if anything were to happen and you stop receiving rent, you want to make sure that you are protected, because you still have to pay for a mortgage,
Absolutely.
right? So 100%. And I want to say that everyone that I know of, like 99% of our clients get landlord's insurance.
Of course, it's peace of mind, and it's not very expensive either. It's worth it.
Yeah. So let's now talk Melbourne market. I'm just trying to wrap up. What trends are you seeing with rents across the Melbourne market?
We're slowly starting to see, it's been good. After the election, we've noticed that things have started to move again, which is great, which is what we want.
Yes.
So we will always find, especially leading up to election, especially this one too, that people are a little bit scared and everyone sort of stops in their tracks and goes, we need to wait and see what happens and then we'll make the decision. So sort of in the last couple of weeks, we've noticed that people are starting to move again. We're not getting sort of offers in for rent that we were getting prior to the election. And we're seeing people that are willing to go into larger properties but sharing.
Okay.
So we had a lot of people, especially with COVID times, that were in properties that they had 2 bedrooms. One was a work from home, you know, study, and they were there living on their own in the other bedroom.
Yeah.
People are now looking, going, cost of living's hard.
Yes.
Let's move into something bigger, but we're going to go in there with another couple or 2 other people.
Yeah.
So we are starting to notice that there are more people moving into properties, which is good, where you've got your 4-bedroom houses or your properties that might be in your outer suburbs as well, that are larger, but it's more affordable for people.
That's good. And one of my learnings that I'm going to share here, and this doesn't apply just to Melbourne, I've now seen it across everywhere. It's like winter is always harder. Like, I don't know why. Because people should need to move any time of the year. But there's something with winter, and whenever I have vacant properties in winter, it just takes me longer.
Yeah.
It is quieter in winter. I mean, especially in Melbourne, if you've had a Melbourne winter, no one wants to leave the house.
But you say that in Melbourne. This week for me, I'm celebrating a big milestone. I've been saying this in social media. So I'm getting 10 tenancies. So yes. So I had, of course, when you have 10 tenancies, when something happens, everything happens at the same time. Usually that's the case. Yeah. So I had the property with the water damage, tenants leaving, like everything happened with that one. And then I was building in Perth. And so it's a dual income. So I have two different tenancies moving in there. So all 3 are starting this week, right? Wow. Now, no matter whether it's that one in New Zealand, whether it's Melbourne, whether it's I have a Hunter Valley or Perth, it took me way longer than what I was expecting. And I know enough because I tell this to my clients, and it's hard when you live through it. It's like, it's gonna take time, it's winter. And property manager was like, Tiffy, this is happening all across the market, especially we started trying to put people in just before the elections.
Correct, yeah.
Elections, winter, it's like, there's nothing to do. You don't wanna correct, the rent is the correct one. You need patience and time. And that was it. Patience and time.
Yeah.
Look, to me though, I think that properties that are presented well, are marketed well, and are priced well should lease in any market. We work really hard to ensure, but you're right. Of course, you're going to potentially have to reduce the rent in some times of the year. We do have strategies in place. We do have areas like Caulfield, right? Caulfield, where we have apartments right near Caulfield University.
Yeah.
That is definitely a very cyclical market where January, Feb, March, very busy. All the students are coming in.
Yeah.
And then again for second semester, July, August. And every other time it's very quiet. Our job is to then, we may come to you and say, hey, you know what, Tiffy, we've got you a tenant in January or in March. Let's only do a 6-month lease to get them back into that January cycle and then renew it 12 monthly from there so that they're always falling in the right cycle. And, we may waive some fees to help you and make sure that we're not charging too much for you and that you can afford to do that.
Yeah.
But there are definitely strategies in order to make sure that you avoid those quieter months. But ultimately, that's our job to make sure we're maximising your returns and minimising your vacancy. And if your property managers are not good doing that, maybe you should get us to look after them.
Awesome. Perfect. Love it. So yes, feel free if you're needing a property manager, you can come to Wealthy always, and we'll redirect you to the amazing team because we've been working together for 5 years right now. It's been a long while, and all along, all of our clients have the option of working whether they want to take our recommendation or not. But I want to say 99% of them do. And so far, feedback has always been really, really good, girls. So yeah. We want to close with just one recommendation for someone who has not bought their first property investment yet. And they're thinking, but they're fearful of what if it doesn't rent out? So what would you say to that person?
It will always rent out.
So much.
How long do we have?
We have 1 minute.
We have 1 minute. Look, for us, I think having someone like a Wealthy who is giving you that advice, you're doing the research, you're making sure that where they're looking to invest is going to work. And obviously there's a property cycle and there's ups and downs. We're there to help you with that side, and you've done the research to make sure that you see them through. So
Bye. My advice is, and I will always, I am Melbourne's biggest fan. Melbourne is the most undervalued market in Australia right now.
100% agree.
I've just read an article, they're mooting 9 million residents. We currently have 5.4 in Greater Melbourne. We will be at 9 million residents by 2050. Yeah. We are about to enter a rental crisis that I think is going to last about 15 years.
Wow.
We have housing shortage supply, cost of living is high. I have no doubt that renting a property, getting a tenant for your property in Melbourne is never going to be an issue. And it is our job to make sure that we're maximising those returns. But Melbourne is a great place to buy. You can still buy great property with excellent yields. And so the cash flow should be good. Yes, it's not easy or cheap to hold a property, but I think that once you apply tax benefits, if you can in Australia, it actually should be very much neutral or positive.
I'm thinking that right now, Melbourne, you have a proven track record of being the city that grows the most, even above Sydney, in over a long period of time. And right now, it's giving you a strong enough cash flow that it feels like you would be going towards the more affordable tier 2 cities, right? And there's this massive catch-up. Whenever I say catch up for prices to do, it's just comparatively cheaper or more affordable than other cities. So much so that I think this applies to both the property prices but also rents. I think rents need to catch up.
Oh yeah. Rents in Melbourne are still very affordable. We just had this conversation, $1,400 for a 2-bedroom in Sydney.
Yeah.
In a similar area in Melbourne, you'd probably be paying $750, probably half price. So rents do have to catch up, and they will. It's all about the cycle. Interest rates are coming down, investors are coming back into the market. If I had money to invest right now, I'd be doing it well before the rest of the population catches on, because Melbourne prices are about to go up.
100%.
So
and we need
that's
investors.
my advice. We do need investors, because they have come out, a lot of them have come out over that COVID period and with the land tax and other things, but I think long-term Melbourne's a great investment strategy.
100% agree. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having us.